Hello chess friends and welcome kids out of chess channel and welcome to a new super event that started recently on the TCEC official chess website. Welcome to the TCEC Cup 10 finals in 2022. So this cup events are a little bit different than the usual TCEC competitions and also some other computer chess championships. This is a bracket format. This is a knockout stage. If you lose one match game, then you're getting kicked out of the super event. So it's really a dynamic tournament. So it's like a almost like a playoffs or TCEC playoffs we have here going on. So we're starting now with the quarterfinal stage with a beautiful gameplay by Stockfish 15 against another top engine Stoofvlees, in which a King's Gambit had to be played. And I really wanted to cover more of this beautiful romantic era chess openings because I miss, of course, some Paul Murphy games, some Adolf Anderson games, some Wilhelm Steinitz games in which we have seen really immortal tactical shots and immortal beautiful attacking opportunities. So as I said, I miss sometimes a little bit the romantic era chess, so that's why I will try to cover as many as possible of this beautiful King's Gambit game. So let's see now what happened. It was, in my opinion, one of the best games of the King's Gambit that I've seen in my life. So here E4 was played by Stockfish 15. We have E5 by Stoofvlees, and now comes the move F4. The King's Gambit is on the board, and here we have Queen to H4, and this is probably not the best of ways to play against the King's Gambit, because you have to accept, I think, the Gambit. You have to play e takes f4, then after something like knight to f3, a good line could be knight to f6. You can play also the move g5. You can also play the move d6. So you can play many possibilities, but in my opinion, what you should do as their first move is simply to accept the Gambit. You should play e takes f4, and that's sort of an unwritten rule. That's when you play against the Stockfish engine, you should just accept the challenge. If you are not accepting the challenge, you're getting destroyed for sure. So I've covered now really many games also by Stockfish 15 and also by some other top engine, in which when you are declining the King's Gambit, then you will face many positional problems. So in top engine level, in my opinion, this declining lines are simply not working. So okay, let's see now how Stockfish handled the so-called King's defense with the move Queen to H4. So Stockfish plays G3, which is a normal idea. Now Queen to E7. Notice if the E file gets cleared, then the E4 pawn could be a vulnerable point here, and then also the rook could be hanging. So that's why knight to C3 here played by Stockfish. We have E takes F4, and now what you should not do from White's perspective is to play G takes F4. Then you get again this very annoying Queen to H4 check, and you face then many positional problems. So also D5 is an opportunity then to open here the E file. So that's why after move E takes F4, now comes D5, and here after move F takes G3, we have H takes G3. And okay, let's stop and evaluate a little bit the position, because I think it's very important to know what's going on now on the board. White is down a pawn, but many times out of the King's Gambit, what you want to get is this pawn central control. What I mean about the pawn central control is, of course, that you are having these two centralized pawns, which are controlling, of course, these four squares. We have to also say black has also a disadvantage in development, because the queen is standing in the way of the bishop, so the bishop cannot be developed on a natural square on e7, and the queen will probably lose another tempo, maybe moving to d8, maybe moving to b4. But it's a very important thing to say here, that black will lose an extra tempo, and in King's Gambit and also in any opening, a tempo is a very important thing. So that's why we have to say it. Okay, white is down a pawn, but has a compensation of this beautiful pawn central control, and has a compensation of its opponent's lack of development. So that's why I think it's a equal grade so far for both engines. So here in the continuation, we have knight to c6, continue the pressure against these two pawns. We have a bishop to g2, we have d6, and now knight to h3. And this is a tempting move, because many of us, I think, would probably play bishop to h3 in order to maybe stop here the knight to come to g5. But here after bishop to h3, you face again many positional problems. First, what we have to say is you cannot castle queenside. I think black would love now to castle queenside and then maybe play something like g6, bishop to g7, knight to f6, but it's not possible because of the bishop's activity. And you see now that after potential, I don't know, maybe normal development, actually white can even play bishop to e3. So this line is simply not working. although it's tempting maybe to take out the pawn on e4, but even if you do that, knight to e4, then you see you get this one, knight to d5, and now white's pieces are dominating all over the board. You have to step back, and now even kingside castling is possible, so you have many positional problems. If you try something like bishop to e7, look at this, queen to g4 is going to happen. You lose the battle around the square. g7, the knight on e4 is hanging, so it's simply a bad continuation for black. So after move knight to h3, the Stoofvlees engine didn't want, of course, to take out the knight. It's not the problem here. Stoofvlees played h5, and this is now a very dynamic move, because Stoofvlees is saying, okay, I will attack you now during the h file. If you castle maybe kingside, you could get destroyed by this beautiful flank attack. So here after move h5, we have queen to d3. Stockfish is probably preparing bishop to e3, bishop to f4, maybe even queenside castling here. So here in the continuation, we have queen to d8. That's why the downside, as I said in the beginning of the video, you see black is losing now an extra tempo with the queen in order to liberate the square for the knight, or maybe to liberate the square for the piece here. So we have bishop to e3, we have g6, and now a really cool move here by Stockfish 15, kingside castling. And I'm not sure how many of us would castle kingside here in this particular position, because you have only one pawn in front of your own king. In my opinion, when I analyze the game, I would queenside castle for sure. Still, the engine loves, of course, white's position. That's not the point, but this decision to castle kingside is really a brutal one. Now Stockfish is saying, I will attack now, finally, your opponent f7. So here bishop to h6 was played. Stoofvlees is trying to simplify the game by trading off more pieces. When you, of course, up a pawn, when you have advantage in material, then simplification ideas are perfectly fine. So bishop to h6, now comes a new stunning move by Stockfish 15, knight to d5. So Stockfish is playing really on a nice attacking formation. If you play here, knight to e7 was played by Stoofvlees, and now also a very important move, rook to e1. And that's the principle of using every piece in the attack. When you're playing on the attacking side, you should include all of your pieces in the attack. It's not enough just to attack this position with, I don't know, 2-3 pieces. You see every piece now by Stockfish 15 is used in order to attack the black's camp. So here after move rook to e1, we have c6 kicking with the knight, and now knight to f6. So Stockfish is using now this weak square in the position, because the Stoofvlees engine, of course, played this on this idea, didn't cover the f6 square with the bishop. So we have here knight to f6, and now comes a very important move, bishop to h6. And what to do here? For instance, if you would have taken here the knight on f6, then in my opinion it wouldn't be good, because after bishop to g7 you lose another tempo. Then you have to play rook to f1, and now even kingside castling is possible here for black. And I think in the near future we can expect even a move like f5 would be possible. Then after knight to f5, bishop to f5, rook to f5, you see black would have sort of a King's Indian attack. Black would have a good control also on the king side. So that's why after move bishop to h6 was played. So after move bishop to h3 was played by Stoofvlees. If you play now rook takes h6 in this particular position, then it's not so good, because you get this one, knight to g5. White doesn't have to even take out the knight. That's the beauty about Stockfish attack here. Okay, white is down a piece, but this wouldn't be a good continuation for black, because if you play something like knight to g8 in order to support your knight on f6, then queen to c4 is going to happen, and suddenly you have many tactical problems here around the square. f7, for instance, you could try queen to c7, but now with e5 this position gets simply too open here. D takes e5, D takes e5, the knight has to move. But look at this, rook to f7 is coming into the game. You have to play queen to b6, then we step back, but still bishop to d5, queen to d5 is going to happen, e6, e7. So whatever you want to do here, I think black is getting destroyed. So as I said, even here rook to h6 is not a possibility. So that's why Stoofvlees tried after move bishop to h6 to play bishop to h3, try to take out the knight. But now Stockfish plays a very important move, bishop to g7, uses now the dark square problems that black has in the game. So we have here rook to h7 attacking the bishop, bishop to f6. We have now queen to d7, and here Stoofvlees is playing on a beautiful idea to again play something like h4, maybe open the h file, and then to sneak in with the queen, with the rook and queen battery, and maybe even deliver checkmate on the h file. This was also a very powerful idea. So okay, Stoofvlees is playing on a counterattack, so nothing wrong. Let's see now what Stockfish will do in this particular position. So Stockfish is playing now the move d5, which is very important because the knight, I think, in the near future could be used maybe here in order to maneuver, maybe here something like knight to c6, maybe c5, then knight to c6, and then maybe to get the use of the d4 square. So what Stoofvlees is trying to get is of course some kind of an activity with this very, very weak knight on e7. So that's why here d5. So Stockfish is saying you'll not come with this knight into the game. This move is cutting off the potential knight's activity, and if you open, of course, if you play c takes d5, then e takes d5 is going to happen. Then you lose also the battle here on the e file. So then it will be of course game over here for black. So after move d5 we have h4. So Stoofvlees is playing on the normal plan to somehow include the queen on the h file and deliver checkmate maybe here on the h file by using the rook and the queen activity. So we have bishop to h4, we have king to f8. Stoofvlees is getting this square in order to secure the king, but we have to say this is already a weak position for the king on f8. So it's not a common position, it's not the position where you have maybe secured the king by castling on this side of the board. So even if you castle, I think here on the queen side, then still you didn't lose any activity maybe, but here with move e5, d takes c6 can be played, then you still have problems when the queen maybe comes here on a6. So the bishop is very, very active. You have still some problems around the square f7. So in my opinion, this should not be a good continuation here for black. So that's why king to f8, but as I said, this is still a weak position for black's king. So we have bishop to h3, queen to h3, now rook to e2, trying to of course to cover here the second rank, and now a very important move g5. And it seems so that something went wrong here for Stockfish, because now suddenly the h file will be open, but actually it's not the problem after bishop to g5. Even if you play something like queen to h1, if you try check, then still white can escape using the dark squares in order to get here on this side of the board. Maybe you could play also a check, but now after king to e1, you could maybe trade it off, queen to e2, and now after something like queen to h7, I still think that it's a much better position here for white. We can use now the move queen to f3. We can double up here on the f file. Still the knight is a weak piece, so it's nothing special going on here for black. So black had his fun with a couple of checks, but the game didn't change dramatically. So after move bishop to g5, here Stoofvlees tried c takes d5. We have bishop to h4, cutting off now the connection between the queen and the rook. We have rook to g7, and now king to f2. King to f2 is very important. If you play of course something like e takes d5, then you get queen to h4, so you cannot take because of the g file attack. So after move king to f2 was played here by Stockfish 15. We have knight to c6, we have e takes d5, and now knight to e5. So finally Stoofvlees also found a good square for the piece. Finally the knight is coming into the game, but it's a little bit too slow because Stockfish has now this opportunity, has now this beautiful counter-attack against the weak pawn on d6. So we have now the move knight to c4. This is a must move by Stoofvlees, and now bishop to e7. It's beautiful counter-attack here by Stockfish. We have king to g8, and now queen to f3. We have queen to h2, and now after king to e1, we have a check, queen to g3, rook to g3, and we have reached now finally an endgame stage. So let's stop and again evaluate the position of this particular endgame. In my opinion, this is a much better position for white, especially because of one particular problem, because the pawn on d6 here is on a dark square, so it can always be attacked by the dark square bishop. If this pawn would be on a light square, if every pawn would be on a light square by black, then black could have maybe a decent position, but still we can always kick away this knight with the move b3, and then finally try to grab this grab this pawn on d6. So first, what Stockfish played here is bishop to f6, securing first the pawn on b2. It's almost like Stockfish is saying, I will have time to get this pawn on d6, so nothing dramatically changed also in this position. So we have rook to h3, we have rook to g1, the very nice check, we have king to h7, and now bishop to d4, centralizing the piece. We have b5, and now rook to e7. So you see, Stockfish pieces are much more active. Many of these pawns are strategical weaknesses here. The pawn on f7, also the pawn on a7 is a huge position problem, so it's a much better endgame here for white. So we have knight to e5, we have bishop to e5, we have rook to e3, king to d2, and now after move rook to e3, now Stockfish finally grabs this pawn. We have rook to f7, king to h8, and now king to c1. Of course, if you take here rook takes d5, then the problem is now you get this one, rook to f6. You can maybe try to play king to h7, but now with b3 we can include now this rook into the game. We can double up again maybe on the 7th rank, and all of these pieces, all of these pawns, pardon me, will be again simply targets for white. So although it's not a huge advantage here for white, but I think this isolated pawns are causing many position problems in black's position. So white will find the way, I think, for sure, in order to attack this pawns in the continuation of the game. So that's why here king to c1 was played, but now Stoofvlees is playing rook to h5. It's not allowing this annoying check on the h file. We have rook to d7, we have rook to d5, but now after rook to h1, king to g8 was played, and now rook to h7. This is now huge threat. Of course, the rook is hanging here, so that's why here Stoofvlees has to play rook to f8, but now Stockfish grabs this pawn on a7. Really beautiful maneuver with the rook in order to grab this pawn. Very important pawn, which was, of course, on the a file, but if you connect it somehow to the b pawn here, then black could maybe have some drawish chances. But now after rook to a7, this is a completely winning endgame here for white. So after rook to f2 was played a3, we have rook to c5, attacking the pawn on c2, c3, and here Stoofvlees is trying to play a rook to d2 and grabbing the pawn on b2, but Stockfish finds, of course, a beautiful counterattack. We have a rook to b7, because if you try now rook to d2, then of course rook to b5 solves all of the positional problems. You cannot take the pawn on b2. So after rook to b7, we have rook to the e2, we have a rook to g1, delivering a check, king to f8, and now new check, rook to f1, we have king to g8, and now stepping back, improving a little bit the position of the king, king to b1, rook to h2, rook to king to a1, we have rook to e2, and now very important move, rook to f4, because now Stockfish will try again rook to b4 and grab this pawn and still have a control of the b2 square. So we have a rook to c5, rook to f7, we have rook to d5, and now rook to d7 threatens also a checkmate here, maybe by rook to b8 or rook to d8. So that's why Stoofvlees has to play this way. If you try now check, then still we can cover with the rook on e8. So we have a king to a2, rook to e8, we have king to b3, trying now to include the king into the game, maybe to grab this pawn. We have rook to a8, rook to b6, and now you see also the pawn on d6 is hanging. So that was, I think, the problem through the whole game, this isolated pawns, this weaknesses, the structural weaknesses that black had through the whole game. Now after move rook to h5, we have rook to d6, king to e8, rook to d5. Now Stockfish can take also another piece and another pawn, pardon me, and this is now completely winning endgame here for white. So king to d8, we have a4, rook to b6, trying to simplify the game, trading off more pieces. Here Stockfish played rook to b7, including now also this rook into the game. We have rook to f8, rook to c6, a nice check. Now simply pushing the pawn further, and there is now the threat, of course, of the move rook to b8. So we have king to h8, rook to g7, we have rook to e8, again this idea, rook to b6 with the idea to play rook to b8. So king to c8, we have rook to b7, rook to h8, now rook to d7, rook takes a7 here. Stoofvlees had it enough. Here Stockfish took, of course, the rook and threatens also in the near future the checkmate on the back rank. So rook to h6, rook to g7, rook to b6, king to c2, rook, king to c8, and after move rook to g8, it was a beautiful checkmate. So great game, I think, by Stockfish in the King's Gambit. It's a little bit forgotten opening, as I said. We want to see, I think, more of these games, because sometimes when I play for fun, I play also sometimes the King's Gambit, but I really want to know more about this opening, because it's so dynamic. Who knows, in the near future maybe Stockfish 2020 or something will show us that actually the King's Gambit is a good opening. Who knows, with the development of course of the top engines, also this this opening seemed more playable for humans, for every player now. As I said, in my opinion, these games are very important in order to see what could happen, for instance, in some sharp lines of the King's Gambit. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting study of the keen defense of the King's Gambit. If you want to see more brutal attacks like this, check out my commented chess games played by computer series, with some more games played by Stockfish, Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, Dragon Engine, and many more. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.